I've never been obligated to speak for 7 minutes precisely, and I didn't have anything to reverse engineer to learn how to do that, so I made an effort to write this out. In the popular media and also in conversations with colleagues here at UCSD, I frequently hear reference to a basic issue, the value of nature. And it usually is expressed through two kinds of queries. What shapes how people value nature? And what causes these values to change? At first glance, these seem to be reasonable questions. However, if humans also are part of nature and much of the natural world has been humanized, so to speak, what actually is shaping what? What is valuing what? This provokes a line of research that I've begun to pursue and would be very keen to bring into dialogue with the work of people here today. Stated as a question, how do we come to know more about interhuman and human-nonhuman interaction without relying on the habitual analytical distinction of nature-culture or nature-society and the more basic opposition of matter-meaning? I can't fully answer this today, but I do want to provide a sense of what I'm exploring with the hope that it might spark more discussion and possible collaboration. Together with fellow researchers, I've honed an approach called semiosic inquiry, which means the study of the action of signs or sign action. It's not at all like the semiology we inherit from modern linguistics, organized around a relatively stable dyadic relationship between structure or code and its formal instantiations. But nor is it a free-floating idealism that precludes hypothesizing about real tendencies beyond that which is immediately perceivable. The semiosic modality entails appreciating how something, a sign, figuratively pulls out and represents aspects of something else, its object, so as to yield a third thing, a communicative quality or meaning. This third thing, in turn, may further signal or represent the something else, the original object, in a slightly more or less developed way, so as to generate yet another communicative quality, a slightly more or less developed meaning. This three-way signification can continue indefinitely. It can reflect a quality of semiosic concordance, a rose is a rose is a rose, or it can exhibit change, as when terrorism was transvalued and became democracy over the course of the French Revolution. To grasp the sense of continuity that semiosis presupposes, think of the passing of sandbags. However, each sandbag necessarily carries aspects and qualities of all its previous bearers and their acts of passing it, which gets stuffed into the sandbag with each pass, tendentiously reproducing it, developing it, diminishing it, or sometimes radically changing it and the subsequent passing process. We can borrow the distinction between initial and boundary conditions to get at what is happening in semiosis, except that what is a boundary at one moment becomes initial at the next. The concept of path dependence also helps capture the fatefulness and directionality of semiosis. I wish to emphasize that when we look for this triadic passing process in a complex, open, socio-natural field setting, that's my primary laboratory, we find it everywhere, and it immediately troubles many of our received analytical distinctions and assumptions about causation. Here's a quick illustration of how value and meaning in the action of signs saturates a socio-natural whole. Let's follow one kind of sign, sea urchins in San Diego, over a period of time and include their ocean habitat and their consumption by ethnically diverse San Diego residents. We'll see some interesting semiotic patterns and connections hidden in what we conventionally distinguish and separate out as the cultural, the biological, and the material. The part of human life that we define as culture or cultural is dominated by signs of convention. It's a domain of diversity and dynamism, with sign relations changing over time and across space. The expectation of fresh sea urchin in the mouth, and called by the Japanese word uni, is a familiar and affirming moment of semiosic concordance. This sense of coherence is what gives culture its quality of essence. Such admirable comfort food takes people home. But a live sea urchin under a human foot in the ocean is a stranger, a radically exterior other forcing itself across the border of bare skin. Stepping on a sea urchin will not immediately teach a person where magnetic north is, but it can add a new quality of spatial monitoring and reckoning and beach selfhood and social activity. In this, its discomfort is part of a habit change, a radical shift in semiosis or sign action. A beach is no longer a beach in the same way, nor is the swimmer, nor probably is the sea urchin. As Ben Bergen was suggesting, but in different terms, stepping on a sea urchin would entail the semiosic movement from percept to concept, bringing aspects of this open semiotic whole into language and cognition, making it available for the future. Lera Borotsky's concern also could be understood as a focus on key moments of semiosic diversity, isolated constant conjunctures. Whenever this, it refers to that in culturally concentrated talk and thought about sea urchins, for example. Now, biologists looking both at humans and at organisms like sea urchins have developed the semiosic framework for reconceptualizing communication and function within and among living systems. This has allowed researchers to work at the infra and supra-individual level, seamlessly moving across molecular processes, myocin, muscles, mindful bodies, and embodied minds, and then on to ecological niches and species evolution. And now think of Kim Rubenstein's work and the combined motions and emotions that would make up eating and stepping on sea urchins. The stability and concordance of semiosis, as well as incremental change at this scale, comes close to a definition of life. Finally, in the domain of the inorganic, we find that semiosis is even less dynamic and quick. There are sea urchin skeletons compressed in what geologists call the San Diego Formation, literally the terrain and immediate seafloor of this region that came into being 2 to 3 million years ago. Cliffs in northern Europe, flecked with pieces of flint, also contain the compressed skeletal material of sea urchins. A friend and colleague at Columbia University with whom I've collaborated names the distinction between culture and nature as the difference between the semiosic quick and the semiosic dead. But as I mentioned, semiosis is potentially infinite. The long-dead sea urchin shells in England come to life as part of the object referred to in Thomas Huxley's 1868 essay On a Piece of Chalk, and then again in 1944 as a hidden feature of the White Cliffs of Dover in the tune of the same name made famous by Vera Lynn, and as a referent in Jimmy Cliff's 1969 song, Many Rivers to Cross. Whatever we conceptualize as things, whether individuated selves, their worlds, and any aspect across both, really are dense clusters of concordant signs in action. Any agglomeration of signs that has this quality of semiotic habit, we can say has agency, the capacity to make something happen. For human beings, such concordance provides the sense of integrity of being that makes action possible. It also is what makes the consequences of actions more or less predictable. Whatever we are and know about reality is through the representational process of semiosis. Knowledge and creativity are by definition mediated. They are iterative, inferential processes. The genius of a scientist, a musician, or an entrepreneur is not that they make something from nothing. Instead, as a colleague at Berkeley put it, knowledge and creativity really is closer to making something else from nothing but. But when we talk about value in the fullest sense, or rather, when we talk about value in the fullest sense, we're asking about the admirableness of such sign concordance, whether they comprise selfhood, sea urchins, sushi, painful, surprise, or songs. When we inquire into the consequences of actions with respect to these, we are in the domain of ethics and politics. And when we evaluate the accuracy of these semiotic representations, we're dealing with questions about knowledge, truth, and reason. With the semiotic framework, we see that these three domains really are indivisible, though we often think of them as fully different and separate, even with specialized academic disciplines for each. I'm not dogmatically wed to the semiotic modality, and hearing the presentations today makes me very curious about all of the work, but I can't help recognize that the semiotic modality does have some promise for contributing to transdisciplinary inquiry into human knowing, being, and creativity, which, like matter and meaning, nature and culture, even facts and values, cannot be divided up as distinct, separate, and oppositional domains, each with their specialized disciplines. I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation. Thank you. I've never been obligated to speak for 7 minutes precisely, and I didn't have any that I've begun to pursue and would be very keen to bring into dialogue with the work of people here today. Stated as a question, how do we come to know more about interhuman and human-nonhuman interaction without relying on a basic issue, the value of nature? And it usually is expressed through two kinds of queries. What shapes how people value nature? And what causes these values to change? At first glance, these seem to be reasonable questions. However, if humans also are part of nature and much of the natural world has been humanized, so to speak, what actually is shaping what? What is valuing what? This provokes a line of research, anything to reverse engineer to learn how to do that. So I made an effort to write this out. In the popular media and also in conversations with colleagues here at UCSD, I frequently hear reference to